Hi there, welcome to 15 Minutes to Merge. My name is Christopher Harrison. I'm a senior developer advocate at GitHub. And one of the biggest challenges that I face as a developer is moving from project to project, trying to install different libraries, and dealing with all sorts of little obscure error messages and so forth. And that's, of course, not to mention the fact that as I'm moving from project to project to project, I'm just filling up my disk with a whole bunch of NPM packages and everything else. So it really makes it frustrating to try and be a developer, and really just to write that first line of code serves as a barrier for contributing to open source, and also as a barrier to contributing to inner source to other projects inside of an organization. Fortunately, there's a better way. So I have Bassem with me today. He's a senior software developer. I think I've got that title right, or at least close enough. And he's here to talk today about Codespaces. So Bassem, thank you very much for joining.
No, thank you for having me.
So
Codespaces is one of my favorite products actually.
mine too. So what is Codespaces for anybody who maybe hasn't heard of it before?
Yeah, so Codespaces allows you to create a virtual development environment that is consistent, that can be replicated across a big organization for all of the team members. I'm personally a neat freak. I don't know about you, but I like to keep my machine as clean as possible. I don't want to worry about, dependencies, code hanging everywhere, dealing with different versions of different libraries and whatnot. So having a code space that is both ephemeral, I can spin up, do the work that I need to do, shut it down, and not worry about anything else is really perfect for me.
I love that. And Codespaces then sort of run up in the cloud, so I almost like just don't have to worry about it when it comes to setup, that it can be configured one time and then just away I go from there. Everything is just up there.
Absolutely. Like if I am a team lead on a certain team and my developers are using different environments, some people like to use Windows, some people like to use Linux, some people like to use Mac. It's very important for us to have a consistent development environment so that we don't waste time, dealing with the inconsistencies across different operating systems. Codespaces allow us to have a virtual machine running in the cloud, and then we can configure a developer container with all of the tools we need to make sure that our development environment is always consistent and is as close to production as possible. And this is one of the major added benefits of Codespaces, and it allows to replicate this across large organization with substantially different teams, and we can also template it. That's really cool about it. We can, from one template, we can even create sub customizations. Some people want a little bit less tooling, some people want a little bit more tooling, so we have all sorts of knobs and buttons to change.
Okay, very cool. So then in order for me to set up a code space, it sounds like I'm going to be defining a dev container, which really brings up this question is, what's then the core difference between, say, using a code space and using just local dev containers and just like installing Docker and doing everything locally?
Honestly, I don't see that much of a difference, except for the idea that now we're just moving our dev container to the cloud. We're not really consuming the resources on our own machine, and we are just provisioning virtual machines that are available on demand. That can also eliminate the barrier of having physical hardware that can be quite costly for to buy on a scale of hundreds of engineers, let's say, because these virtual machines are just available on demand, right? How many times can you buy a MacBook Pro with 64 gigs of RAM and I don't know how many virtual CPUs and give it to one of your employees? But with Codespaces, you can actually have that machine up and running for a few hours a day, for example, and then shut it down when you're done. I think it's a pretty cost-effective way to deal with this.
So I can just then get that compute power on demand. And then also in turn, like going back to being a neat freak, then I don't have to worry as much about having all of these dev containers, because even that still needs to be cleaned up at some later point. Again, if it's up in the
Absolutely.
cloud, then I don't have to worry about that as much.
hmm One of my most favorite things is, let's say I break my development environment, and who has not done that before, right? You can just shut down your code space and create another one. It's so disposable, so ephemeral. Just get a fresh start and get moving.
Okay, I dig that. So then how do I use a code space? How do I get started?
The way you can do that is quite simple, actually. So if I go to my repository on GitHub, I'm going to start with a clean vanilla code space. We're not going to do much customization yet. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just say, I'm going to click on the plus button over here, and I'm going to click on continue and create code space. And it's going to ask me to open this in my Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to accept it. And it might take a little bit of time because now the virtual machine is being provisioned and my repository is being cloned locally on the machine. But as you can see, everything happens pretty fast. And now this is a virtual environment. I'm not running on my local machine anymore. My VS Code is now connected to the developer container in the virtual machine in the cloud. And now I can work with this project the same way I would work on my, local machine.
Okay, so you have that container that's running up in the cloud. That's the code space. That's what you created by just going click, click, and then voila, created that default code space. So there's no custom configuration on that. That's running in the cloud, but you're running Visual Studio Code locally and connecting up to that in the cloud. So I've got my own IDE configured the way that I want, and now I'm just using that dev container that's sitting up in the cloud, much in the same way that I would be using that dev container locally on Docker.
100%. So if you can see here, my ID is completely different than the one I'm running locally. So this is a demonstration that we're running in a code space. You can see here also the name of the code space that you're running this project and application within. And also my entire repository has been checked out already and available for me to start using.
Cool. Okay. And so can you then run the application just as you were running it locally as well? So that way I can test it and play with it and make sure that it's working.
100%. We can definitely do that. But before we do this, we need to obviously download some of the dependencies. We need to install Maven, install Java, install all of that fun stuff. However, we made it a little bit easier for everybody because now we can just customize what we call a dev container. And in the customization of the dev container, I can tell it what all of the dependencies that I need installed, and they can become available for me whenever I spin up this code space again. We can go through that right now.
Okay, yeah, let's see that. So that way I'm defining it one time, and that way I won't have to go back and set all of this up every single time I want to open this up for the first time.
Absolutely, because we can do it manually right now, but that's quite boring, and I'm pretty sure all the developers know how to set up their development environment in a way or another. So the way we're going to go about it is by starting the command palette, and I'm going to say here, code space, add dev container configuration files. This is the easiest way to do it because it gives you like a sort of a wizard that you can follow, and you don't have to really go and read a ton of documentation to figure out how a dev container really works. And here you can also specify whether you want your dev container to come to be configured using a Docker file, or you can define the specifics of the configuration yourself, which is what we're going to be doing right now.
Okay.
So now, I'm going to...
Sorry to interrupt. If I chose from a Docker file, let's say I'd already defined a Docker file that I was using for local dev container work, could I just then use that right here?
Correct. You can use it as is. You might need to add a couple of things to it just to make sure it works in the new environment, but you can pretty much use your existing Docker files if you already have them defined in your dev container configuration.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. So here you have a bunch of pretty sensible defaults. You can use, a Debian-based container. You can also use Docker in Docker if you have applications that need to run Docker as well. That's pretty useful. And you can also start with a Java configuration or a Java dev container, which has JDK already installed. You can also add to it Gradle or Maven, whichever package manager you'd like to use. You can even have a container set up with PostgreSQL as well. So there are a lot of different configurations that are available for you and really good, and they work off the shelf.
Okay.
So we're gonna start with the Java one. Yeah. All right. Once you pick the version you want, you can decide which package manager you want available. I'm going to go with installing Maven. And then also you can decide what other additional things you want available. So in my case, I would probably want the Azure CLI tools because that's dependency for my application. I could choose also to install the JDK, but it's already available by default. You can choose other variations if you want.
I'm
I want
noticing
the
a
GitHub
lot of
CLI.
libraries, a lot of tools that are
Yeah,
available inside of there. The one password I thought was kind of interesting as well. I suppose if you
yeah,
need
right.
credentials to go access other resources, then you can have that.
100%. GitHub CLI, I pretty much love our GitHub CLI tool, and I always make sure that it's available in my Codespaces just because it's so useful and handy. And I think this is it. We're going to keep everything to the default. We don't really need to tweak much. And as you can see here, already a dev container file has been created inside the .dev container folder. And this is all the configuration I want. This is the name of the dev container. This is the image we're going to be using. Microsoft does a great job in publishing Docker images that are, security scanned. They are just ready to go. And then you can customize a little bit the features you want installed. And there are a bunch of other configurations. We can go through them. Actually, let's go through them. It makes sense to set it up because rebuilding the container might take a little bit of time. So if your application forwards exposes some ports, for example, when we ran it locally, if you noticed, we ran the port 8080, and this is important. So it's very, very important for you to be aware that there needs to be a connection between this dev container in the cloud and your local machine, right? And the way this works is via something called port forwarding. So we can expose the port 8080 in our dev container in the cloud and make it available for us on our local machine. There are customizations that we can do, I'm going to show you in a bit, to make it only available for folks in your organization, which makes the port accessible after authentication, or you can make it publicly accessible. So if you want to share your app with other folks who are outside of your organization, that's also feasible. So for now, we're only gonna uncomment this and just add the value 8080 over here. And Copilot already knows what I'm about to do, so which is really cool all the time. And post create command is pretty much anything you want to run after the code space is spun up. So after the code space is created, you can say, for example, in my case, I want to run Maven compile. And then you have this nice attribute over here where you can add further customizations. So one of the things I like to do is if you need access to other repositories, for example, this is where you can add them. For now, we can keep it commented. I'm going to show you how to do this in a bit. And also, let's make sure we fix all of the problems here.
I think you just need a comma up above, yeah.
Yes, that's correct. And let's make sure that we also label the port that we are forwarding, right? So let's use something called post attributes. And then we can give this port a name. We can call it application, you can call it web server, whatever makes sense, because once you configure this port, there might be a lot, and you really would want to know what these actually stand for. And that's pretty much it. Pretty simple, pretty easy. There's not much going on. One thing you should be you should always remember is that whenever you save files in your code space, these are not persisted in your repositories automatically, right? So let's not forget that we always need to stage these files and push them upstream so that they are persisted, okay? It's very critical, this part.
That's something that took me a little minute to remember the first time that I was using Codespaces, because it does seem, since it's in the cloud, they're like, oh, I'm writing directly to my repository. But if we stop and think about that, I probably don't want to be writing directly to my repository. So it makes a lot more sense that it's doing that in that cloud container, and then I still have to push that up just as if I was developing locally.
Absolutely. The only distinction is that instead of doing it on your local machine, you're doing it in the cloud, but everything else about your lifecycle or development workflow stays the same.
Right.
So right now we're just going to commit and sign this new file. Let's call it add dev container. And then we're just going to push it. And you noticed here that I really didn't bother configuring my Git or authenticating it or adding any of the credentials, right? It's already pre-configured for me. The credentials have already been generated. Git has been configured so that I can push to this particular repository that I started in my code space. All right. Now that the dev container has been pushed, what I need to do is I need to also launch the command palette one more time. And then I need to call something called rebuild container. And what this will do is it's going to restart my code space, but it's going to take my dev container configuration into consideration this time, as opposed to starting vanilla and without any of the customizations.
Okay, cool. And with a little bit of video magic editing, we're going to shorten that space. And then one last thing, since this is obviously taking it a few minutes, you did mention that it's possible to pre-stage this, so that way the next time a developer goes in, they don't have to wait for this entire thing to build up, that they can just go click, click, and it's basically available on demand within just a few seconds.
100%. Administrators can configure this for their teams, yes.
Cool.
All right. We are now up and running in the new container. As you've seen here, Maven compile was already called. And let's do some sanity checks. Let's type in Maven version. We should get some output. And as you can see, Maven is already configured. And now we can actually run our application if we want to. So let me close this and extend this a little bit. And we can go through pretty much the same process again. We can just type in Maven package, and everything should just work as if it's working on my local machine.
And you also could have added that in as a startup script if you had wanted to.
Correct. Yeah, if this is something you would want to do from the start, definitely. What I love about it is on my local machine, it took about 48 seconds. On the Codespace, it took 15. This is some of the benefits you might get also from working in Codespaces. All right, awesome. Now what we can do is we can run this jar file just like we did locally. And it's up and running. Now what we can do is, you remember we forwarded the port. So if you go to this specific tab over here, you can see that the web server port 8080 is already forwarded, and it is available and connected to the port 56908 on my local machine. And if I click on this small, globe button here, it's just gonna spin it up in my browser. And now I'm actually connected to this application that's running in my code space from my local machine. Okay, so I have my local application running on port 8080, and then I have the application running in my code space on the port 56908, and obviously you can change whichever port this is being forwarded to.
That's very cool. So it's behaving just as if it was running locally, but instead all of that's running up in the cloud, and all of that's based on the configuration that you define. And again, all by using that that tooling that's inside of VS Code, because I'm pretty sure most everybody that's watching, like, we could do what we need to do inside of Docker, but I often feel like a lot of times I'm sort of tricking it to get to do what I want it to do, if I'm being honest. And so being able to just walk through the wizard, get that initial setup, and then have an environment that now I can work on is really powerful.
Absolutely. But the best feature I love about this is right now, we're doing this demo. And let's say I want to share this link with you, for example. I can just right click on this and change the port visibility to public, for example. And then what happens is I'm going to get a link that I can just copy, send it to you, and you're going to be able to run this application on your own local machine. You're going to be able to run this in your browser, by connecting to my code space. Which in my opinion is pretty awesome. Like, how many times have you been, designing something or building something and you just want to show it to some team member, or the designer needs to verify that your, UI work is working and it's built as expected. This is a pretty cool way to do it.
That is very cool. But again, by default, that's all going to be private. So if I want to make sure that I'm the only one, or that my team is the only one, then I also, of course, have controls to be able to do that.
Absolutely. we definitely don't want to expose anything that should not be exposed publicly for sure.
That's all very cool. So now in just that couple of clicks, that couple of seconds, I don't have to worry about installing anything locally. I don't have to worry about like library versions or anything else. Now it's just click, click, and I've got that environment that's been configured, that's been defined once, and that initial setup, that initial barrier to being able to contribute to a new project is now removed. All of that is now gone.
Correct. And now I can simply show you, like I can terminate my code space and I can exit it. And I can just go to the list of code spaces that I have and shut it down. So let's do this. I can using GitHub CLI, I can list my code spaces. And I think the last one was the symmetrical pancake.
Yep.
It's good that you mentioned the name because that's how we're going to remember it. And then I am going to delete it. And that's it. It's gone. It's gone from my list. However, that doesn't mean that all of my hard work is gone because the dev container is in my repository right now. So let's have a look here. If you see it, it's available. And then what I can do is I can spin up as many code spaces as I would like from the exact same dev container. And I will have everything be available with all of the necessary configuration and everything I want.
Okay. Now, one thing that I see people sometimes get confused on is that it's the code space definition that's being shared, not the code space itself. So if I went into that repository and I created a brand new code space, it's going to be based off that definition, but that code space is going to be, a new one will be spun up that will be specific to me. So I'm not like sharing that code space with you, like not sharing that virtual machine with you.
Correct. And you can see that these are different instances. They have different names. They have different life cycles. You can manage them differently. You can remove them, delete them, rename them, do whatever you want with them. But yeah, they are owned by the individual who starts them.
So what we saw there is how we can go in, how to define that code space, how to be able to spin that up, how to do a little bit of configuration and be able to connect up to that. If I remember right, just one last little question. You're also able to do development and connect to that from the browser as well, if I remember right. So if I'm, say, maybe wanting to work on an iPad, like that's the only system that I have right now, I could actually just host that inside of a browser and get VS Code?
Absolutely. This is something you can configure on your personal profile. You can specify what is your preferred development environment, and you can launch this whole setup, VS Code with all of the bells and whistles right in your browser as opposed to setting it up on your local running VS Code.
And no more local setup. I love it.
Yep.
Bassem, thank you so very much for joining us today, taking us through Codespaces and giving us an ability to be able to start contributing to other projects without having to go through all of that setup and make sure that we have that consistency across all contributors to a project.
My pleasure. I can talk about Codespaces all day. I use it every day and I love it.
We're going to bring you back. We're going to talk more Codespaces again in the future.